Hello, my name is Professor Ian Williamson. I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of the Paul Merage School of Business here at the University of California, Irvine. Welcome to another episode of the Dean's Thought Leader Series. Today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Dr. Britta Wilson. Dr. Wilson is the Vice President, Inclusion and Outreach at Pixar Animation Studios. In this role, she is responsible for creating inclusive workplaces that allow for a wide variety of people to contribute to the fantastic stories told by Pixar Animation. She also leads their engagement with the broader community. Prior to her role at Pixar, Dr. Wilson served as the Chief Diversity Officer at Expedia, and prior to that was the Senior Vice President, People and Organization at Paramount. She's been recognized for her contributions to industry and community in numerous ways, including the MBA of the Year Award from the National Black MBA Association, as well as receiving recognition for her leadership from AACSB, the leading international accreditation body for business schools. Dr. Wilson, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. It's really a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to be here. It's my first time at UCI Merage School of Business. I've been on the campus many times, but thank you for having me here.
I'm glad we fixed that.
Okay, first time. Tick that off the box.
Yeah.
We've done that. Thank you so much for the invitation.
So I'm just really excited to talk to you about the work you do, you do in an exciting organization, but maybe start with how is the best way to describe it? This is an exciting time. Maybe that's the word I'll use. The last few years have truly been, things we've never seen before. So many things happening all at once. How has this impacted the studio? And what have been some of the ways in which the studio has responded to, there's a pandemic, there's social issues, there's political unrest, there's a whole host of things going on in society?
I think we've responded like most organizations, first with shock and awe, like, oh my gosh, what is happening in the world? I think like many organizations, we've found the ability to kind of reconnect to what's important and to focus on getting our content out. That is literally what our focus is. We believe that there's power in stories, and we've really committed to making sure that we do that, especially during the pandemic. When the pandemic started, we were in the throes of production on a number of films. And so as the pandemic was taking us out of the studio and to our homes, we had voice talent recording in closets. We had animators and technical directors, fighting for internet capability and stability to be able to, cut sequences and get work done. I think what's happened with us specifically is, Pixar's history is really rooted in this area of innovation and can-do attitude. So I think for us, we hearken back to what got us to where we are today and really set ourselves forward with the ability to have that can-do attitude, to be able to deliver the content that we've been able to do so. So I think as of now, we have, during the pandemic, released 3 films during the pandemic. And that's a pretty big statement because it takes us about 5 years to make a film. So as these films are lined up to get them out, and as I said, under some bizarre and unusual circumstances, has really been spectacular.
So any lessons learned as you were navigating this process?
My gosh, breathe. I think all of us have learned to breathe, or I hope we have. I think for us, I think we've probably learned the same lessons that most orgs have learned, which is, focus on what's important, accept change and don't put brakes on change. Be willing to be flexible and agile, be willing to pivot. I think having the focus on, or renewing a focus on corporate culture and what that means for people, and to create access points for them to reconnect virtually has been extremely important. We're a fairly small studio, and 98% of our employees work on one campus. And so for us to be virtual when so much of what we do is collaborative, we miss the sparks. I tell people all the time, I miss the sparks of sitting in a story room and listening to a director pitch their idea or think through a series in the film, just as much as I miss making a decision about something on my way to the lunch line, right? Because all of those meetings were so important to the fabric. All of those touch points were so important to the fabric of who we are. And so now those have to be scheduled Zoom meetings. And so learning how to navigate what had been impromptu happenstance meetings and sparks that occurred through the creative process now having to be scheduled has really been, I would say it's been a bit taxing, but I think we've learned to navigate it fairly well.
I've spoken with a lot of different leaders and organizations, and this transition of understanding how they run and lead a remote work environment or a hybrid work environment. I don't think anybody has a perfect playbook for that. And what have been the learnings and the experiences so far with you around that? Is it a trial by error type of thing?
I think absolutely. Again, I think we're all in this together, and we've all been in this together for the past 2 years. And I think for us, it's been trial by error. I think that what our team in the inclusion space has really been focused on is how do we still create membership for people when that membership is virtually? How do you still create a sense of belonging when you're looking at, 47 postage stamps on your Zoom screen? And so we've really tried to early on invest in tips and tools and resources to help people, help leaders navigate that, to corral in that sense of energy and that culture that's been so important to who we are as a business and as a studio and as a content creator.
So I would love to get your sense on the role of inclusion in this whole process and how you and your role create an inclusive environment. What are the approaches you take to ensure that is there?
Well, I think it's a journey, first of all. I think that anybody who tells you that they've arrived is probably selling some property that you might not want to purchase. I think it's a journey.
You got a bridge somewhere I should buy?
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I think for us, what we've really tried to focus on is thinking about inclusion as both visibility and value, so that people can be seen, but also that their contributions are valued. Our process is very iterative and collaborative, and so you can imagine how much more lift we get when people feel like their contributions matter, that they're seen. And so the wonderful thing about the role and the team that we have, that we're not only responsible for helping to create a sense of inclusion and belonging for the employees, but also translating that to representation and content. So we spend as much time on the people in the organization side of the equation as we do on the content creation side of the equation. So inclusion in the content side of it means thoughtful, intentional representation. If there's going to be a character of color or a character of some dimension of difference, how do they navigate the story in a way that's real, that embraces that and embodies the membership that they have in that community? And so the duality of those responsibilities is a little different than most, but it's the stuff that really excites us for sure.
Well, much of the research that talks about the value that diversity brings to organizations speaks to how it creates spaces for innovation, and that ideally translates into innovation in your products and services. Right. And so it sounds like that's a very seamless package for you in your role.
I think it's become more and more so. I joined the studio, I've been at the studio a little over 5 years now, and I joined at the time that we were, I'd say 2/3 of the way completing Coco. And so Coco was a wonderful film. It remains to be a wonderful film. But it was a film that was developed across difference, meaning that the director of that film was not an in-culture participant of the culture represented in that film. And so I think one of the things that we learned in that is that that's okay to do, provided you provide the scaffolding and support and the intentionality to ensure that that culture, that community is represented in a thoughtful way. And so our seamlessness of that, I won't say is so seamless. It's a process. We've been learning. Our next film where we had that opportunity was in Seoul. And so we were very much involved in ensuring that Joe Gardner navigated that story, that world, as an authentic Black man, not as a shaded character, if you will. And so we've continued to make that investment. So the line is, I don't want to say seamless, but I'll say is slightly more clear for us. And we've really tried to provide all the support that we can in the content creation to ensure that we're really being thoughtful about what we're putting out there.
Got it. I would love to know what attracted you to the role, and maybe even more interesting for other individuals who are watching this is, how did you prepare to have such a role?
It's a great question. I don't know that I could say that I intentionally prepared. I
Yeah.
can say that I think I ended up in the right spaces and places at the right time, to be quite honest. I grew up in the HR space. I grew up as an HR leader. I enjoyed the people work. I enjoyed the strategy work associated with talent and human resources. But as a Black woman growing my career, I often found myself as the lonely only. I'd be
Yeah.
sitting in a room by myself, both as a Black person, a woman, a mother, the whole 9 yards, working and going to school. There were all these different dimensions of difference that I felt like intersected and that I embraced and embodied, but would look around the table and go, why am I the only person in this room? There's nothing special about me. So why aren't there others? And what are the blocks that are creating that obstruction or that access? And so I worked during my time at Paramount. I was leading HR for a large segment of the studio, and I reported to I laugh when I tell the story, I reported to the COO at the time, and we would have, I believe, a monthly lunch as our touch base. And as we'd walk across the studio lot, every time I would say to him, this is ridiculous. How come I don't see anybody that looks like me in these rooms? And why do we have to walk across this paseo and I never see anyone who looks like me? And he was very kind and would nod his head up and down. And well, we have to do something about that. And we'd, batter a couple of ideas around. And one particular morning, I was driving in from Orange County to Paramount Studios, and he called me. His office called and said, when you get here, meet with him right away. And I thought, oh gosh, what, the wheels on the bus have gone off on something. I had no idea what it was.
You're in HR and you get that call.
Yeah,
your
right?
mind goes to the worst.
It's like, oh my gosh, what in the actual heck is going on? So I walk in, I sit in his office, and he's quite a character. And he turns around and he says to me, for the last, I don't remember the amount of time, but for the last X number of months, you've consistently said that this is a frustration for you. And I said, yeah, I'm like, oh, pull my soapbox out now. I didn't realize we were going to talk about this at 7:30 in the morning. So I pulled my I'm like, yeah, it is a problem for me and we got to do something about it. And with all of the calm and poise, he said, it is your problem to fix now. You're the chief diversity officer and I don't want to hear you complain about it anymore. I want you to fix it.
Okay.
And I will tell you, Dean, that I had a moment of pause as I was walking out of his office, and I was like, this is a prime example, Britta, of where your mouth has gotten you into a situation where you really might not know how to solve this problem. It seemed really good when you were saying it, walking across the paseo, but now to have accountability for it, ooh. Yeah. And so what I did was I spent time talking to employees because I wanted to understand what their experiences were and where they anticipated the blocks. And that's actually a practice that I've carried with me throughout every role that I've had in this space. I also realized shortly after that I needed to have some of the academic research understanding of this work and the theoretical foundation of this work to build upon with my professional experiences. So shortly after Paramount, I decided to go and get a doctorate to really understand leadership dynamics in this space specifically, and that's what my dissertation was on. But I say that to say that it's all been iterative, that I've just built upon the experiences that I've had and the knowledge that I've been able to glean by being in human resources and having incredible mentors and incredible sponsors, and not being shy about speaking up if I thought something wasn't necessarily correct. So long answer, but a fairly circuitous route to get me where I was, or to where I am now.
I think at its heart, a notion of inclusion has to start with someone feeling comfortable, either because of their environment or because of their confidence, to bring themselves to that space, to be who you are as you do your work. How have you been able to do that in your career? Because I'm sure over the course of your career, it's not always been the path of least resistance. How have you dealt with that in the various situations you've been in?
Well, as I said, I've spent a lot of my career being the lonely only, and I think one of my beloved mentors / sponsors, colleagues, it really taught me very early on to pick your battles and pick the battles that are most meaningful to you. Because oftentimes you can communicate a level of passion and a level of necessity when it's something that's important to you. Yeah. Don't fight on everything, but pick those things that have been important to you that you really want to give voice and visibility to. And so I've attempted, I can't say that I've done it well in every case, but I've attempted to lend my voice to those things that I felt were just spectacularly important and critical. And in some cases, to be quite honest, where I would be willing to die on that hill. That
Yeah.
might be the hill that I just have to say, you're lovely people, but this is not,
Yeah.
my time here is done.
Yeah.
So I think finding that confidence and having that core of self-awareness has been helpful to me in that space.
Got it. So if you were speaking to a room full of our undergraduate students, what would you be telling them to prepare themselves for as leaders if they look out 4 or 5 years from now, and the types of positions or questions or opportunities they would be exploring? And how would you recommend they prepare themselves?
I would say prepare yourself with truth.
Okay.
Know yourself. Know what your tolerances are. Know where you're willing to stretch. Be comfortable with who you are and what capacity you're willing to give yourself at any given point in time. I would also say that, most things don't last forever, and it's usually engraved in jello versus stone. So don't get caught up in the things I think we can oftentimes get ourselves tripped on,
Yeah.
on title, on organization, on, salary,
Yeah.
Stay to thyself, be true, really focus on what's important to you. What are the things that create a spark for you, and make those investments there.
Got it. Dr. Wilson, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate your candor, your insight.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time.